The Darfur massacre, labelled the world's worst humanitarian crisis by the UN, had an adverse impact on Sudan's entire social system. The Darfuri people lived in a western Sudanese region that was primarily devoted to agriculture. Since gaining independence from the British colonial administration in 1956, the Darfuri region of Sudan has experienced significant socio-economic injustice, primarily as a result of poor governance. Several rebel movements that opposed the government and promoted Arab supremacist ideals emerged in the 1950s and 1960s. These Arab alliances started to spread their supremacist ideology, and during the late 1980s, these Arab alliances began to disseminate their supremacist philosophy. The main event that began the raging civil war turned genocide occurred in April of 2003. Two rebel movements emerged in Darfur: the Sudanese Liberation Army, abbreviated to the SLA, and the Justice and Equality Movement, or GEM. These groups focused on rebelling against the Arab Alliance's ideologies. This image from SudanTribune.com is a powerful visual primary source depicting the violent arms and mentality that the rebel group SLA holds, explicitly depicting the mob mentality held by the members. These two rebel groups conducted an attack on the al-Bashir airport, destroying military equipment and completely overwhelming the Sudanese government. The attack led to retaliation from the government and the formation of the predominantly Arab-speaking Janjaweed group. The Janjaweed carried out an extensive campaign of brutality and pillaging of non-Arab villages alongside the Sudanese army. 300,000 Darfurians died in the bloodshed and 2 million people were displaced as a result. The Janjaweed would burn Darfuri villages after looting houses, raping women and children, and murdering masses of innocent people. All 10 of Gregory Stanton's stages of genocide can be seen exemplified in the Darfur crisis. Explicitly, classification, dehumanization, and most significantly, denial. As well, the extermination of the Darfur people was considered one of the largest and most brutal massacres in history. The murder of Darfuri men, women, and children with fire, guns, machetes, and bombs created a hostile, deadly environment for all Darfuri people living in the villages that were being targeted. The stage of classification is viewed through the divide created by the Arab Sudanese communities, who were primarily animal herders, against the Darfuri farmers. The view was of a lesser human due to different skin, values, and occupation. This morphed into an us versus them mentality for most Arab Sudanese people, who would later turn to violent views as a way of dealing with the lesser valued citizens of Sudan. Also prominent was the dehumanization stage of the genocide, seen in the destruction and disrespect for human life exemplified by the Janjaweed. Translating to a man on a horse with a gun, the Janjaweed's acts of rape, torture, and murder against Darfuri people and the burning of their homes was due to the inhuman beliefs against the Darfurian people. This photo of a young Darfurian boy demonstrates the acts of violence. According to the BBC, the boy was burned after his brother set off some unexploded ordnance near their home, effectively highlighting the constant torture the Darfur people were put through and the uncertainty of their survival. However, the most disturbing stage of the genocide would be characterized into denial. Through burning all the bodies of those who were murdered, there was no clear evidence left to indicate a genocide had taken place. This created a difficult situation for national courts and legislation as they couldn't prove anything with clear-cut certainty, which made the implementation of any aid void of consideration. The genocide has had detrimental effects and impacts on the functionality and diversity of Sudan as a country. The genocide led to an increased migration rate to neighbouring countries, North and East Africa, and theoretically Europe. The displacement of the Darfur people was estimated around 2 million, still leaving 300,000 dead back home. Long term, Darfur might possibly never recover. The drastic drop in population has opened a large hole in Sudan's agricultural areas and grown food supply. Less farms are available due to them being burned and destroyed by the Janjaweed, and the dispensation of agricultural knowledge is virtually non-existent. Additionally, the Darfurian survivors have lost over 3,500 villages which need to be rebuilt, despite the copious amounts of psychological damage experienced due to the destruction, rape, torture, and murder the villages of Darfur have sustained. The government's military expenditure increased $1.7 billion in US currency per year, creating a gap in debt that Sudan will struggle to fill, especially considering the loss of a large population contributing to agricultural exports. To sum up, the brutal massacre of the Darfuri people due to the dehumanizing discrimination and social supremacist views of Sudanese Arabics has led to the destruction of an entire civilization of predominantly innocent human beings, psychologically damaging many Darfurians to the most extreme degree and impacting the agricultural practices of the whole country of Sudan.